I grew up in a small town where dreams were about as rare as big opportunities. My parents were hardworking folks, the type who believed in earning your bread through sweat and humility. Dad was a mechanic, always under the hood of some old car, while Mom worked part-time as a clerk at the local grocery store. Money wasn't something we had in abundance, but we got by. As a kid, I wasn't the brightest in school. I didn't have top grades or stand out in any particular way, but I had this insatiable curiosity about the world. I loved taking things apart, old radios, clocks, whatever I could find, to see how they worked. But growing up in a place where ambition was often squashed by reality, this curiosity felt like a quirk rather than a gift. Teachers saw me as average, friends saw me as goofy, and my parents saw me as a mystery they couldn't quite figure out. High school came and went in a blur. I wasn't the star athlete or the class president. I was just that guy who blended into the crowd, occasionally popping up with some odd fact about computers or a new way to fix a broken toaster. I worked part-time at a local diner, washing dishes and eventually moving up to waiting tables. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid for the occasional gadget I wanted to tinker with. I liked the diner, though. It gave me a sense of rhythm, of structure. There's something oddly satisfying about the hustle and grind of the hospitality world. The rush of a busy night, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation. After high school, college was a distant dream I couldn't afford. Instead, I took up waiting tables full-time. It was supposed to be temporary, just something to hold me over while I figured out what I wanted to do with my life. 1 year turned into 2, then 5. By the time I was in my early 20s, I had moved to a larger city to work in a fancier restaurant. The pay was better, the clientele more upscale, but the grind was the same. It was long hours, aching feet, and smiling through complaints that didn't make sense. Around this time, I met Sarah. She was everything I wasn't. Outgoing, charismatic, and effortlessly cool. She worked as a bartender at the same place, and she had this knack for lighting up any room she walked into. I was smitten. We started dating, and for a while, life felt good. She brought a kind of excitement into my life that I hadn't felt before. She'd talk about her dreams of traveling the world, starting a business, or doing something big, things I never let myself dream about. Being with her made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I could dream a little too. My family, on the other hand, was less enthusiastic about Sarah. They thought she was too wild, too restless for someone like me. They'd say things like, "She's not the settling down type," or "You're getting in over your head." But I didn't care. For the first time in a long while, I felt alive, like I was part of something bigger than just surviving day to day. The hospitality industry was my life. I was good at it, too. I'd learned to read people, anticipate their needs, and charm my way out of sticky situations. But deep down, I knew it wasn't enough. I'd see the regulars at the restaurant, business types in tailored suits, always talking about deals and investments, and wonder what it would be like to have that kind of life. I wanted more, but I didn't know how to get it. Then came the turning point, the moment that set everything else in motion. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon at the restaurant, and one of my regular customers, a tech guy named Ryan, was sitting at the bar. Ryan was the kind of guy who'd talk about things you didn't understand and then laugh like you were in on the joke. That day, he was going on about something called Bitcoin. I'd heard the word before, but didn't know much about it. He said it was the future of money, that it was going to change the world. I remember laughing it off, thinking it was just another one of Ryan's crazy ideas. But later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if he was right? What if this was my chance to finally do something more with my life? I didn't have much saved up, just a couple $1,000s I'd been squirreling away for a rainy day. But for the first time, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years, hope. Looking back, those were the last of my simple days. Before the risks, the ridicule, the heartbreak. Before the nights spent staring at charts I barely understood and the mornings waking up to find I'd lost more money than I'd made in a week. But that's the thing about hope. Once you've felt it, it's almost impossible to let it go. Little did I know, I was about to embark on a journey that would test every part of me. And it all started with a waiter, a dream, and a crazy idea about digital money. The more I thought about Bitcoin, the more it intrigued me. Not just the idea of it as a currency, but what it represented. It was decentralized, open, and unpredictable. Everything my life wasn't. My days were tightly structured by the restaurant's shifts, my earnings limited to tips and the occasional raise. The idea of something outside this rigid framework, something untethered and wild, appealed to a part of me I didn't even know existed. I began reading up on it whenever I had the chance. Articles, forums, even obscure white papers I barely understood. Most of the information was technical, filled with jargon that felt like a foreign language. But I kept going. I'd stay up late after shifts, scrolling through pages of text on my beat-up laptop, trying to make sense of blockchain technology, mining, and digital wallets. I didn't know where it would lead, but I felt like I was onto something. Sarah noticed my new obsession. At first, she found it amusing. She'd tease me about being the crypto guy at the restaurant, asking if I was planning to mine Bitcoin on the old cash register. But as weeks turned into months, her teasing took on an edge. She'd roll her eyes when she caught me glued to my screen, muttering about market trends or hashing algorithms. I couldn't blame her. Even I felt a bit crazy sometimes. But the deeper I dove, the more convinced I became that this was my way out. The first time I invested, I was terrified. I took $500, a big chunk of my savings, and bought Bitcoin. It felt surreal, like I was throwing my money into a black hole. The price fluctuated wildly, and every dip made my stomach churn. I refreshed my trading app obsessively, watching the numbers go up and down. Mostly down, in those early days. It was stressful, exhilarating, and utterly consuming. Word got around at work that I was into crypto. Ryan, the tech guy who'd first mentioned Bitcoin, became my go-to for advice. He'd come in, order his usual, and drop tidbits of information about altcoins, market cycles, and hodling, a term I learned meant holding onto your investments through thick and thin. His confidence was infectious, and I started branching out, buying small amounts of other cryptocurrencies with strange names like Ethereum and Litecoin. But not everyone was as supportive. My coworkers thought I was nuts. They'd laugh and make jokes about me becoming a Bitcoin millionaire while I was still wiping down tables. "Don't quit your day job," they'd say, and then laugh like it was the funniest thing in the world. I'd smile and shrug it off, but inside, it stung. I wasn't trying to be some get-rich-quick schemer. I just wanted a shot at something better. At home, things were tense. Sarah had always been the adventurous one, the dreamer, but she couldn't understand my fixation with something so abstract. She'd complain about how I spent more time reading crypto news than talking to her, how I'd rather watch tutorials on blockchain technology than go out for drinks with her friends. I tried to explain it to her, but it was like trying to describe color to someone who'd never seen it. She'd nod, say she got it, but I could see the frustration in her eyes. My parents were even less understanding. When I mentioned Bitcoin to them during a phone call, my dad snorted and said, "Sounds like one of those pyramid schemes." My mom was more diplomatic, but I could tell she thought I was wasting my time and money. To them, the idea of making money without tangible effort, without a steady job, a paycheck, and something to show for it, was incomprehensible. The isolation was hard. It felt like everyone around me was content to stay in their lanes, while I was struggling to break out of mine. I started questioning myself. What if they were right? What if this was just a pipe dream, a distraction from the real world? But every time I thought about giving up, I'd remember the way my heart raced the first time I saw those Bitcoin prices tick upward. It wasn't just about money. It was about possibility, about rewriting the rules. Over time, I got better at managing my investments. I learned to ignore the daily price swings and focus on the bigger picture. I discovered communities of like-minded people online, forums, and chat groups where others shared their stories of triumphs and losses. It was comforting to know I wasn't alone, that there were others out there betting on a future no one else could see. Still, it wasn't easy. The market was volatile, and my portfolio often looked like a roller coaster. There were nights when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made a huge mistake. But there were also moments of triumph, small victories that kept me going, like the time I managed to double my initial investment on a lucky trade, or when I finally understood how to transfer crypto to a hardware wallet without losing it in the void. Through it all, I held on to the belief that I was onto something real, that maybe, just maybe, this crazy ride would lead somewhere worth going. And despite the doubts, the ridicule, and the growing tension in my personal life, I couldn't let go of the hope that had brought me here in the first place. By the time I had been investing for a year, the cracks in my life started to widen. Sarah and I were drifting further apart, and I could feel it in everything we did, or didn't do. Conversations became shorter, smiles rarer. She didn't understand why I couldn't just focus on the job that paid our bills. In her eyes, I was gambling away our future on something as intangible as the air around us. And honestly, some days, I didn't have a good argument against that. Work, once my refuge, became another source of tension. My coworkers' teasing turned into outright derision. Every joke about my crypto obsession was sharper, more cutting. "Oh look, here comes Mr. Bitcoin," they'd say, snickering as I walked by. It didn't help that I had started picking up extra shifts just to cover my living expenses and fund my investments. Exhaustion weighed on me like a second skin, and the smiles I wore for customers felt paper-thin. The financial stress was relentless. My initial investments had grown, sure, but they'd also plummeted just as quickly. Crypto was a roller coaster, and I was barely holding on. Every high came with a crushing low, and the volatility was taking its toll. I started dipping into my savings, then my credit. The debt crept up on me slowly, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I told myself it was temporary, that the market would rebound and everything would be fine. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Then came the day everything changed. It was a cold, gray afternoon when I found out Sarah had been seeing someone else. I stumbled upon the truth accidentally, a message on her phone, a name I didn't recognize. The details are a blur now, but the impact was like a gut punch. My world, already teetering on the edge, came crashing down. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. Sarah had been my anchor, the one person who'd made life feel a little brighter. Losing her felt like losing a part of myself. And yet, as angry and hurt as I was, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that I couldn't entirely blame her. I had been so consumed by my investments, my obsession, that I'd neglected the relationship we'd built together. In chasing a better future, I'd lost sight of the present. The days that followed were some of the darkest of my life. I threw myself into work and crypto with a single-minded desperation, trying to drown out the pain. But the harder I worked, the more hollow I felt. My debts were mounting, my social life was in shambles, and now I didn't even have Sarah to turn to. I started questioning everything. My decisions, my priorities, my very worth. Was I chasing a dream or running from reality? I hit rock bottom one night after a particularly bad shift. The restaurant had been slammed, and a table of rude customers had left me a paltry tip after an hour of complaints. As I walked home in the freezing rain, I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me. My clothes were soaked, my feet ached, and my mind was a whirlwind of regret. For the first time, I wondered if I should just quit, sell off what little crypto I had left, pay down my debts, and go back to living a simpler life. The thought was both comforting and crushing, but something inside me refused to give up. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the faint glimmer of hope that had carried me this far. I told myself that every successful person had their breaking point, their moment of doubt and despair. Maybe this was mine, and if I could survive it, maybe, just maybe, I could come out stronger on the other side. So I kept going. I started devouring every piece of information I could find about financial management and market trends. I created a strict budget to keep my debts from spiraling further out of control. I reached out to online communities, finding solace in the stories of others who had faced similar struggles. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to rebuild. Looking back, I'm not sure how I made it through those days. But I do know this: the pain, the doubt, the relentless grind. It all shaped me into someone who could weather the storm. And as much as it hurt to lose Sarah, her absence forced me to confront the cracks in my life that I'd been too afraid to face. I was still standing, bruised but unbroken. And though I didn't know it yet, the storm was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to fight back. The days after losing Sarah were a blur of misery. Every part of me felt hollow, like the foundation of my life had crumbled beneath me. But even as I stumbled through the fog of heartbreak and self-doubt, there was a spark of something deeper, an unrelenting drive to push forward. I'd hit rock bottom, but from there, the only direction left was up. At first, it was sheer stubbornness that kept me going. I'd spent so much time and energy chasing the dream of financial freedom through crypto that the idea of quitting felt like a betrayal of everything I'd endured. So, I immersed myself in the world of cryptocurrency even more. Every free moment was spent reading, learning, and refining my approach. Persistence became my lifeline. I combed through forums and blogs, studied market trends, and taught myself how to analyze charts and patterns. It was grueling work, often tedious and overwhelming, but I refused to let the complexity deter me. The more I learned, the more confident I became in my ability to navigate the chaos of the crypto market. My financial situation was still dire, but I found ways to manage it. I cut back on every unnecessary expense, funneling what little I could into paying off debts and reinvesting in crypto. I became disciplined, almost to the point of obsession, tracking every dollar and every transaction. There were no more impulsive buys or risky trades. Every move I made was calculated, deliberate. Passion kept me motivated. As much as crypto had brought chaos into my life, it had also ignited something in me that I couldn't ignore. The idea of being part of a revolution, of reshaping the financial world, filled me with a sense of purpose I'd never felt before. This wasn't just about making money anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could succeed, that I could build something meaningful out of the rubble of my mistakes. There were small victories along the way, moments that reminded me why I was fighting so hard. Like the time a small altcoin I'd invested in tripled in value overnight, or when I finally paid off one of my credit cards and felt the weight of that debt lift off my shoulders. Each win, no matter how minor, was a reminder that persistence paid off. The nights were still long, and the path ahead was far from clear. But with every step I took, I felt a little stronger, a little more capable. Misery had been my starting point, but passion and persistence were turning it into momentum. Slowly but surely, I was climbing out of the hole I'd fallen into. And for the first time in a long while, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could make it to the other side. Losing Sarah left a scar that I carried everywhere. But life didn't slow down for my heartbreak. If anything, it sped up, forcing me to reconcile the mess I was in. Every day felt like a balancing act on a fraying tightrope. Debts loomed over me, a constant reminder of my gamble with crypto. My job became a lifeline I couldn't afford to let go of, no matter how much it drained me. The financial pressure was relentless. Creditors started calling, and letters marked urgent piled up on my kitchen counter. Some nights, I'd sit there, staring at the mountain of envelopes, paralyzed by the weight of it all. It wasn't just the money. It was the feeling of being trapped, of having nowhere to turn. Yet somehow, in those darkest moments, a sliver of resolve always surfaced. Giving up wasn't an option. I started working overtime, picking up every shift I could. The restaurant became my second home, not out of choice, but necessity. I poured every spare cent into paying down my debts and reinvesting in crypto. The market was still volatile, but I'd grown wiser. I avoided impulsive trades and focused on strategies I'd honed through hours of research. It wasn't glamorous, but it was progress. Surprisingly, my persistence began to draw attention. Some of the coworkers who'd once mocked me started asking questions. They'd catch me during breaks, curious about the charts I'd scroll through on my phone. At first, I brushed them off, wary of their intentions. But over time, I realized they weren't mocking me anymore. They were intrigued. Some even wanted to know how to start investing themselves. They'd ask about the basics, how to set up a wallet, what coins I thought were worth looking at. It felt strange to be in a position where people sought my advice, but it also gave me a sense of validation, like maybe I wasn't completely crazy after all. It was a strange feeling, to go from the butt of the joke to someone people looked to for advice. But I didn't let it go to my head. I knew better than anyone how fleeting success could be in the crypto world. For every coin that surged, there was another that crashed. I'd seen people lose fortunes overnight, and I refused to let that be my story. The hardest part, though, was the isolation. Even as I made progress, I felt disconnected from the world around me. Friends had drifted away, tired of my single-minded focus on crypto. Family gatherings became rare, and when I did show up, the conversations were stilted. They didn't understand what I was doing, and I didn't have the energy to explain it. On the rare occasions I opened up about my struggles, the reactions were mixed. Some people admired my determination, while others wrote me off as reckless. I tried to rebuild those relationships, but it was clear that some would never return to what they once were. People didn't want to talk about blockchain or market trends. They wanted to talk about sports, movies, and mundane things I no longer had the bandwidth to engage in. The gap between us widened, and I couldn't bridge it. I learned to live with that loneliness, though it wasn't easy. Every day was a grind, but I found solace in the small wins. Like the time I finally cleared a credit card balance that had been hanging over me for months, or when a low-cap altcoin I'd invested in showed a promising uptick. These moments, though fleeting, reminded me why I was fighting so hard. I wasn't just chasing wealth. I was clawing my way toward freedom. One evening, as I sat at my cluttered kitchen table, I realized something profound. The chaos of my life hadn't defeated me. If anything, it had sharpened me. The doubts, the ridicule, the heartbreak, they had forged a resilience I didn't know I had. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to hope. It wasn't a triumphant, blazing hope. It was quiet, steady, like the first hint of light before dawn. I still had a long way to go. My debts weren't fully paid, and the market remained unpredictable. But I was learning to navigate it with a clarity born of hardship. Step by step, trade by trade, I was rebuilding my life. And even though the scars of my past remained, they no longer felt like weights pulling me down. They felt like marks of survival, proof that I could endure and keep moving forward. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of it. I was fractured, yes, but focused. And that, I realized, was enough to keep going. The lessons I learned during this time weren't just about finance or technology. They were about myself. I discovered reserves of patience and discipline I didn't know I possessed. I learned to embrace failure, not as a sign of defeat, but as a step in the process. And most importantly, I realized that persistence isn't just about holding on. It's about learning, adapting, and growing with every challenge. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I'd let my mind wander to what life could look like if this all worked out. It wasn't yachts or mansions that I dreamed about. It was stability, freedom, and the ability to pursue what I loved without fear of financial ruin. Those dreams kept me moving forward, even when the weight of reality threatened to pull me under. The nights were still long, and the path ahead was far from clear. But with every step I took, I felt a little stronger, a little more capable. Misery had been my starting point, but passion and persistence were turning it into momentum. Slowly but surely, I was climbing out of the hole I'd fallen into. And for the first time in a long while, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could make it to the other side. This was the lowest point of my life. Everything seemed to collapse around me, pulling me into a relentless spiral I couldn't escape. My debts had grown beyond what I could manage. Creditors weren't just calling. They were threatening legal action. The weight of it all was suffocating, a constant, gnawing pressure that left me sleepless most nights. The restaurant, once my second home, became a place of unbearable stress. My shifts grew longer, my tips more erratic. I was snapping at customers, which led to complaints, and my manager started keeping a closer eye on me. I knew I was hanging by a thread, and the fear of losing my job haunted me daily. If that happened, there would be no fallback, no safety net. It would all be over. My health began to suffer. I'd always been able to push through exhaustion before, but now it was different. My body felt heavy, sluggish, as though the stress was physically manifesting. Meals became optional. I'd drink coffee to stay awake, then beer to fall asleep, a vicious cycle that left me both wired and drained. My clothes hung looser on my frame, and I avoided mirrors, unable to face the gaunt, haunted reflection staring back. Crypto, my one hope, had turned into a tormentor. The market was crashing, and my portfolio dwindled with each passing day. Every dip felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I'd refresh the trading app on my phone obsessively, staring at numbers that seemed determined to mock me. What had once been a source of hope now felt like a cruel joke. The isolation was the worst part. Friends had long stopped calling. I couldn't blame them. I'd pushed them away with my obsessive focus on crypto. My family, already skeptical of my choices, grew more distant. Conversations with my parents became strained and awkward, filled with barely concealed concern and disappointment. I stopped attending family gatherings altogether, unable to face their pitying looks and veiled judgments. One night, after a particularly grueling shift, I found myself standing on the edge of my apartment balcony, staring down at the street below. It wasn't that I wanted to jump, but the thought crept into my mind unbidden. What would it feel like to let go? To stop fighting, stop struggling, and simply fall? I stepped back quickly, ashamed and terrified of my own thoughts. But that moment lingered, a stark reminder of just how far I'd fallen. The walls of my apartment seemed to close in on me. The piles of unopened bills, the empty fridge, the broken chair I couldn't afford to replace. Everything felt like a testament to my failures. Even the sound of laughter from neighbors felt like a cruel taunt, a reminder of the joy and normalcy that seemed so far out of reach for me. In the depths of this despair, there were moments when I questioned everything. Was I delusional? Had I been chasing a dream that was never meant to be mine? Every decision, every risk, every ounce of effort seemed pointless, swallowed by a black hole of bad luck and worse choices. I began to resent myself, my stubbornness, my inability to walk away when things first started going south. I started missing shifts at work, too overwhelmed to leave my apartment some days. My manager, once sympathetic, began to lose patience. Warnings turned into threats of termination. My coworkers, who had once sought my advice, now avoided me. The whispers and side glances cut deep, but I didn't have the energy to care. There was a night I'll never forget. It was storming outside, rain slamming against the windows with a fury that mirrored my inner turmoil. I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by papers and empty cans, staring at my laptop screen. My portfolio was a sea of red, numbers plummeting so low they didn't seem real anymore. I wanted to scream, to cry, to destroy something, anything, but I felt too hollow to act. Instead, I sat there in silence, the storm outside my only companion. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Hours, maybe. Time lost all meaning in those moments. But somewhere in that stillness, a thought surfaced. It wasn't profound or even hopeful. It was simple, almost mechanical. You're still here. You're still breathing. That means you can still try. It wasn't a revelation or a turning point. It didn't erase the pain or lift the weight crushing me. But it was enough to get me to stand up, to clear the empty cans, to crawl into bed instead of sleeping on the floor. It was enough to remind me that as long as I was alive, the possibility of change existed. It was a faint flicker of light in an otherwise impenetrable darkness. This was my abyss, the nadir of my journey. I didn't know it then, but surviving it would become the foundation for everything that came next. For now, though, all I could do was hold on. It didn't happen overnight. The road out of the abyss was long, uneven, and riddled with moments of doubt. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. It started with the faintest uptick in the market. Bitcoin, which had been languishing at rock-bottom prices for months, began to stir. The charts I had grown to dread showed the faintest glimmers of green, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, hope re-entered the picture. At first, I was cautious. Burned too many times before, I didn't dare celebrate the initial gains. But as the days turned into weeks, the upward trend held. Other cryptocurrencies followed suit, their values climbing steadily. My portfolio, once a sea of red, began to show signs of life. The small investments I had stubbornly held onto were finally bearing fruit. I threw myself into research with renewed vigor. This time, though, I wasn't chasing the highs or looking for a quick fix. I approached the market with discipline and strategy, honing my instincts and using every lesson learned from the brutal downturn. I diversified cautiously, spreading my investments across promising projects rather than gambling everything on a single coin. The obsessive energy that had once driven me into despair now became my greatest asset, focused and tempered by hard-earned experience. The financial relief, though gradual, was transformative. For the first time in years, I could pay off a few small debts without feeling like I was sacrificing my last shred of security. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the momentum, the feeling that I was finally moving forward instead of sinking deeper. Each payment, each gain in the market, felt like a step toward reclaiming control over my life. Work at the restaurant became bearable again. Though the long hours and demanding customers hadn't changed, my mindset had. I no longer felt trapped, no longer viewed every shift as an endless grind. The knowledge that I had a growing safety net, a plan beyond the next paycheck, gave me a sense of purpose. Even my manager seemed to notice the change, his scrutiny easing as I returned to being reliable and focused. The people around me started to take note of the changes. Coworkers who had once written me off began to ask questions again, this time with genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. "How did you stick it out?" they'd ask, their tones less mocking than before. I didn't have an easy answer for them. Persistence, maybe. Stubbornness. The refusal to let go of the faint hope that things could get better. Family gatherings were still awkward, but the conversations shifted slightly. My parents, while not fully understanding my choices, stopped openly questioning them. They noticed that I wasn't as withdrawn, that I seemed lighter somehow. It wasn't approval, exactly, but it was a step toward acceptance. The biggest change, though, was within me. I started to believe in myself again. The constant self-doubt, the gnawing fear that I was on a fool's errand, began to fade. In its place was a quiet confidence, born not of sudden success but of survival. I had weathered the storm, and I was still standing. That realization was more empowering than any market gain. Opportunities began to emerge, ones I never would have noticed in my earlier state of despair. A chance to collaborate on a small crypto project came through an online forum I frequented. It wasn't a major endeavor, but it introduced me to people who shared my passion and had skills far beyond my own. Through them, I learned more about blockchain technology, gaining insights that deepened my understanding of the market. I also started sharing my story, cautiously at first. On forums, in conversations with coworkers, even in a blog I tentatively began to write, I opened up about the struggles I'd faced and the lessons I'd learned. To my surprise, people responded. My honesty seemed to resonate, especially with those who had faced their own challenges in the volatile world of crypto. It was strange, almost surreal, to go from feeling utterly isolated to finding a community of people who understood what I had been through. The progress wasn't linear. There were still setbacks, days when the market wobbled and old anxieties resurfaced. But I handled them differently now. Instead of panicking, I leaned on the systems and strategies I had built. I reminded myself of how far I'd come and of the abyss I had climbed out of. Compared to that, a bad day in the market was just a ripple in the water. As the months passed, the upward trajectory continued. My portfolio grew steadily, and with it, my confidence. I started to dream again, cautiously at first, but with growing conviction. The dreams weren't extravagant. They were simple, grounded. Paying off all my debts, building a stable financial future, maybe even helping others avoid the pitfalls I had stumbled into. Crypto had begun to show hope again, but the real transformation was within me. I was no longer the person who had stared at those red charts in despair, no longer the person who had questioned whether life was worth fighting for. I was stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. It happened gradually, like the slow rise of a tide. There was no singular moment when I realized I had become a millionaire. Instead, it unfolded over weeks, then months, as the crypto market surged to unprecedented heights. Bitcoin, Ethereum, and several smaller coins I'd invested in skyrocketed. My portfolio, once a source of endless anxiety, transformed into something I could hardly believe. At first, I didn't trust the numbers. I refreshed my trading app obsessively, half expecting it to be a glitch or a cruel joke. But the figures held. What had once been a modest investment was now worth 6 figures. Then, one morning, I woke up to find my net worth had crossed the $1 million mark. I stared at the screen, disbelieving, my heart pounding. I had done it. Somehow, against all odds, I had done it. The weight that had pressed on me for years began to lift. I started by paying off every single debt. Credit cards, loans, overdue bills, All of it vanished with a few keystrokes. The relief was indescribable, like taking a deep breath for the first time in years. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was free. I quit my job at the restaurant. It wasn't an impulsive decision. I had thought about it for weeks, weighing the pros and cons. The place that had sustained me through my darkest times no longer felt like a cage. When I handed in my notice, my manager, who had always been tough but fair, surprised me by shaking my hand and wishing me luck. "You always had something different about you," he said. "Go make the most of it." The freedom was exhilarating, but also overwhelming. For years, my life had been defined by struggle, by the relentless grind of trying to make ends meet. Now, I had options, opportunities one could barely comprehend. I took time to step back and reflect, to figure out what I wanted my life to look like. I didn't splurge on luxury or extravagance. Instead, I focused on stability. I moved into a modest but comfortable apartment, far better than the cramped space I'd lived in for so long. I set up a proper workspace, complete with the tools I needed to manage my investments and explore new opportunities. I hired a financial advisor, someone who understood crypto and could help me navigate the complexities of newfound wealth. But the money wasn't the most rewarding part. It was the validation, the proof that my persistence, my belief in a vision no one else could see, had been worth it. The people who had doubted me, who had mocked me, started reaching out. Old friends who had drifted away suddenly wanted to reconnect. Coworkers who had laughed at my obsession with crypto now asked for advice, eager to replicate my success. Even my family, who had always been skeptical, began to see me in a different light. I didn't let it go to my head. I remembered all too well the years of struggle, the sleepless nights, the moments of despair. Success didn't erase that pain, but it gave it meaning. Every setback, every sacrifice, had led me to this point. I carried those memories with me, not as burdens, but as reminders of where I had come from. With my newfound stability, I started giving back. I donated to causes that mattered to me, including financial literacy programs and initiatives to make blockchain technology more accessible. I also began mentoring others in the crypto space, sharing my story and the lessons I'd learned. It wasn't about showing off or proving anything. It was about helping others navigate the challenges I had faced. One of the most surreal moments came when I was invited to speak at a crypto conference. Standing on that stage, looking out at an audience of people who wanted to hear my story, I felt a sense of fulfillment I hadn't known was possible. I talked about the risks, the heartbreak, the near collapse, and the resilience that had carried me through. The applause at the end wasn't just for the millionaire I had become. It was for the journey I had survived. Life wasn't perfect, of course. The market remained volatile, and I knew better than anyone how quickly fortunes could change. But I was prepared now. I had built not just wealth, but the tools and mindset to sustain it. The chaos that had once threatened to destroy me had become the foundation for a life I could be proud of. I wasn't just a millionaire. I was someone who had faced the abyss and come out stronger. And as I looked toward the future, I knew the best was yet to come. When word got out about my wealth, the reactions were immediate and overwhelming. People I hadn't heard from in years suddenly reappeared, reaching out with congratulatory messages that barely masked their real intentions. Old friends, distant relatives, even acquaintances from my restaurant days all seemed to have some reason to reconnect. It was as if my success had transformed me into a magnet, drawing people who had once dismissed or ignored me. But no reaction was more jarring than Sarah's. One evening, as I was going through emails, I saw her name pop up in my inbox. My heart skipped, not from longing, but from the sheer shock of seeing it. Her message was brief, almost casual, as if no time had passed. "Hey, heard about your success. Would love to catch up sometime." At first, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her wonder if she even deserved a reply. But curiosity got the better of me, and after a long pause, I typed back, "Sure, let's meet." We agreed to meet at a cafe downtown. When I saw her, it was like staring at a ghost of my past. She looked the same, effortlessly polished, with the same charm that had once captivated me. But this time, her presence didn't stir the emotions it once had. Instead, I felt a detached curiosity, as if I were observing someone else's story. She congratulated me, her words dripping with enthusiasm. "I always knew you had it in you," she said, her smile practiced and perfect, but her eyes gave her away. They weren't filled with admiration or pride. They were calculating. She spoke about the good times we'd shared, subtly weaving in mentions of how much she'd missed me. It didn't take long for her true intentions to surface. She wanted back in, as if the past could simply be erased. I listened politely, letting her words wash over me without absorbing them. The person she was talking about, the naive, love-struck man who had clung to her during his darkest days, was gone. I had changed, grown, and survived in ways she couldn't begin to understand. When she finally stopped, waiting for me to say something, I simply shook my head. "Sarah," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I appreciate you reaching out, but that part of my life is over. I've moved on." Her smile faltered, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of anger flash across her face. She tried to recover, but the facade was cracked. "I just thought we could, reconnect. Start fresh." "I'm not the same person I was back then," I replied. "And honestly, I don't think we want the same things." She left shortly after, her goodbye terse and her steps hurried. I felt no satisfaction in rejecting her, only a quiet sense of closure. For so long, her betrayal had been a wound I couldn't quite heal. But now, it felt like the final chapter of a book I was ready to close. The incident with Sarah became a turning point, not just in how I saw her, but in how I saw myself. My success had drawn people back into my orbit, but not all of them had good intentions. I learned to be discerning, to value the relationships that had endured through the hard times, rather than those that appeared only in my triumph. Among those who reached out were a few genuine souls, people who had always believed in me, even when I doubted myself. One of them was Ryan, the tech-savvy regular from my restaurant days who had first introduced me to Bitcoin. He congratulated me, not with envy or hidden motives, but with genuine pride. "You stuck it out," he said when we met for coffee. "You deserve every bit of this." Ryan's words meant more to me than I could express. They reminded me of the journey I'd taken, of the sacrifices and lessons that had shaped me. And unlike Sarah, he wasn't looking to gain anything from my success. He just wanted to share in the joy of it. As my wealth grew, so did my responsibility. I became more selective about who I allowed into my life, surrounding myself with people who shared my values and vision. I focused on building a future that wasn't just about maintaining my wealth, but about using it to create something meaningful. I invested in projects I believed in, mentored aspiring crypto enthusiasts, and continued to give back to the community that had supported me through the toughest times. Sarah's attempt to return was just one of many reminders that success changes how people perceive you. But it also reinforced something deeper, that the most valuable things in life aren't measured in dollars or status, but in authenticity, resilience, and the people who stand by you when the world seems darkest. As I closed that chapter of my life, I felt lighter, freer. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities I had only dreamed of. And this time, I was ready for all of it. Success brought me many things: freedom, security, and opportunities one could never have imagined. But it also gave me something I hadn't expected: clarity. After years of chasing dreams and navigating struggles, I realized what truly mattered in life. It wasn't just the wealth or the validation. It was the chance to build something lasting, to create a life filled with meaning and connection. Amidst all the changes, one person emerged from my past in the most unexpected way: Emily, a childhood friend I hadn't seen in years. We had grown up together in the same small town, running through fields, sharing secrets, and dreaming about the future. Life had pulled us in different directions, and we'd lost touch. But when she reached out after hearing about my success, it felt like no time had passed at all. Emily wasn't like the others who had reappeared in my life. She didn't ask for anything or try to leverage my achievements. Instead, she brought a sense of grounding and familiarity that I hadn't realized I needed. We started meeting for coffee, catching up on the years we'd missed, and sharing stories about how much we had both changed. Her warmth and sincerity stood out in a world that had grown increasingly transactional. What began as simple reconnections soon deepened into something more. Emily reminded me of who I was before the chaos, before the struggles and the triumphs. With her, I didn't have to prove anything or guard my vulnerabilities. She saw me not as the self-made millionaire, but as the boy who once fixed her bike and dreamed of making something of himself. Within a year, we were married. It wasn't a grand affair, just a simple ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. Standing there with Emily, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known was possible. She wasn't just my partner. She was my anchor, my reminder of what truly mattered. Life settled into a new rhythm, one I hadn't dared to dream of during my years of struggle. Emily and I bought a house. Not a sprawling mansion, but a cozy home where we could build a future together. We planted a garden, filled the walls with photos and art, and made it a place where laughter and love thrived. We welcomed 2 children into our lives, a boy and a girl, who became the center of our world. Watching them grow, teaching them about life, and sharing my story with them brought a joy that no amount of wealth could match. I wanted them to know the value of resilience, hard work, and staying true to themselves, no matter what challenges they faced. My work in the crypto space continued, but it evolved. I became less focused on personal gains and more invested in helping others navigate the complex world I had once struggled to understand. I founded a nonprofit aimed at promoting financial literacy and empowering people to take control of their futures. Seeing the impact of that work brought a sense of fulfillment that even my greatest financial successes couldn't replicate. Emily often teased me about how far I'd come from the guy who used to spend hours obsessing over charts and market trends. "You've traded volatility for stability," she'd say with a smile. And she was right. My life, once defined by chaos and uncertainty, had transformed into something steady and beautiful. Looking back, it was hard to believe how far I'd come. The dark days, the heartbreak, the relentless grind. All of it had shaped me into the person I was. Every struggle, every setback, had been a stepping stone to this life. And while the wealth had been a catalyst, it was the lessons and growth that truly defined my journey. I often thought about the version of myself who had stared at red charts in despair, who had walked home in the rain wondering if things would ever get better. If I could go back and tell him anything, it would be this: keep going. The pain won't last forever. The struggle will be worth it. As I sat in the backyard one evening, watching my children play while Emily watered the garden, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The journey had been long and often brutal, but it had led me here. And here, surrounded by love, purpose, and the promise of the future, was exactly where I was meant to be.